cold air leaked through the canvas walls of the command tent, carrying the sharp scent of pine and damp earth. Dim lanterns flickered over maps and gear, their light barely cutting through the darkness, settling around the remote training zone. Radio chatter crackled in uneven bursts, each transmission strained with tension. A cluster of junior operators stood near the briefing table, whispering behind half-covered smirks that the woman beside the map looked lost, out of place, too quiet for a mission like this. Petty Officer Blake Ronan let his voice rise just enough for everyone to hear, saying she would slow them down the moment things turned real, maybe even bolt if the forest got too dark. Weak laughter followed, the kind people use when they are unsure but want to sound brave. Staff Sergeant Leah Monroe said nothing. Early 30s, steady eyes, calm posture. She kept her attention locked on the forest map, studying terrain lines as if she could already see what waited out there, something only she understood. The tension in the tent thickened, fed by doubt and quiet disrespect. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Leah Monroe stood slightly apart from the others, the pale glow of the lantern brushing across her features. Early 30s, lean, steady, composed. She carried herself with the quiet presence of someone who had learned long ago that speaking less often revealed more. Her uniform was clean but plain, without any visible patches or identifiers that hinted at her background. To most of the operators milling around the tent, she looked like support staff or maybe a logistics tech sent to double-check coordinates. No one guessed she was an Army sniper instructor temporarily attached to the Joint Rescue Team. Their doubts came easily. Leah carried a small, old rifle case instead of the sleek, upgraded long-range models the younger operators preferred. She answered only when necessary, listening more than she spoke, offering short nods instead of getting drawn into pointless chatter. Her uniform held no flashy markings, no clues, no trophies of past deployments. To outsiders, she seemed almost too ordinary, too quiet to be useful. As a few operators muttered again about the risk of taking a stranger into the forest, Leah kept her eyes on the map. Only the slightest tightening of her grip showed that she had heard every word. The way she studied the terrain lines made her seem like she was reading something hidden beneath the ink, subtle drops, choke points, ridgelines, shadows. She traced each contour with the controlled focus of someone who had lived in landscapes like this long before tonight. Even as the tent grew louder with tension and muttered opinions, her breathing stayed slow, steady, completely under control. Outside the canvas walls, the forest waited, thick trees twisting into darkness, cliffs that swallowed sound, valleys that could turn echoes into traps. Somewhere out there, a SEAL recon team had gone missing after a surprise ambush during a night movement. Their last transmission was scattered, cut off by gunfire and then silence. Command had spent hours trying to pinpoint their location, but the valley distorted radio lines, and nothing made sense on the grid. Only one conclusion remained. Someone with exceptional tracking experience, night sniper instincts, and the ability to read terrain like a language would be needed to find them before dawn. When the lieutenant asked for volunteers, most operators looked at the ground or away from the map. Leah simply stepped forward and said, "I'll go." The room went quiet for a heartbeat before the whispers returned. Doubt spread quickly. Too quiet, too small, too calm. But Leah did not react to any of it. She treated every operator with respect, answering their questions without irritation, offering small solutions when arguments over routes or strategy flared. She picked up dropped gear for one, adjusted a faulty strap on another's rucksack without saying a word. She didn't try to prove anything, she didn't need to. When the lieutenant asked for her input on the map, she leaned in without hesitation. Her finger traced along a narrow valley line the others had dismissed earlier. She followed it all the way to a bend hidden beneath a cluster of contour marks. For a moment, she paused there, listening to something unspoken. "They're not where you think," she whispered, almost to herself, but loud enough that the closest man froze. Her eyes stayed on that single point in the valley as if the missing team were already calling to her from the shadows. The rescue team gathered near the tree line, breath fogging in the cold as they checked gear under dim red lights. Despite the seriousness of the mission, doubt clung to the air like the mist creeping along the forest floor. Several operators watched Leah Monroe from the corner of their eyes, whispering that putting a sniper in front was suicide, especially a female one. They said it quietly, but with just enough volume for her to hear. Leah didn't look their way. She only tightened the strap on her old rifle case and waited for the lieutenant's signal. Blake Ronan approached with a smirk, hands resting on his vest. "You ever walked a team through a dark forest with shooters hunting you?" he asked, voice carrying through the quiet. Leah lifted her eyes, calm and controlled. "More than you think," she answered softly. Laughter returned to the group, but it wasn't the confident kind. It was thin, uneasy, an attempt to push away nerves. The lieutenant signaled forward, and they entered the forest single file, the canopy swallowing most of the moonlight. Footsteps crunched over frozen leaves. The mist thickened until it wrapped around their legs like a cold current. Radios sputtered, then cleared, then sputtered again. It did not take long for the doubts to surface again. Leah paused near a tree, raising her hand to test the wind moving through a narrow break in the canopy. An operator behind her scoffed and muttered that she was wasting time. Another argued against her recommended route, insisting on a straighter path until the lieutenant stepped in and ordered them to follow her lead. "What would you have done in that moment?" the narrator might ask. "Would you have stayed quiet or stood up for her?" Whispers replaced jokes, and then silence tightened around them like a rope. Leah kept her focus on the shadows ahead. She didn't flinch when branches snapped in the distance or when echoes bounced strangely between the ridgelines. She moved with the steady rhythm of someone reading the terrain as naturally as breathing. When the first sign of danger appeared, it was small and chilling, a single glove lying in the frost, blood staining the fabric. The lieutenant knelt beside it, recognizing the glove as belonging to one of the missing SEAL recon members. The forest seemed to close around them, the mist shifting heavier, colder. A moment later, faint gunshots sounded far off, deliberate, spaced evenly apart. Leah tilted her head slightly, listening with the sharp concentration of someone measuring distance and rhythm. "That's not random," she murmured. "It's a pattern." Blake dismissed her immediately. Every rookie thinks they hear patterns. But Leah didn't respond. She simply adjusted her grip on her rifle case and kept moving deeper into the forest. Minutes passed, the tension rising with every step. The ground sloped downward, slick with leaves and hidden roots. As the team approached a tight funnel between two clusters of thick trees, Leah slowed. She stared ahead, her posture still but alert. Without turning her head, she whispered one word: "Freeze." The entire team stopped instantly. Even Blake stiffened, unsure why she had spoken with such certainty. The lieutenant moved forward carefully and saw what she had sensed. Thin tripwires stretched across the path, nearly invisible in the dark. One wrong step would have set off a chain of traps designed to wound or pin them down. No one laughed now. Doubt slipped into fear, and fear blended into a kind of reluctant respect. The forest felt sharper, the night colder, and the reality of the mission settled heavily on every shoulder. Leah stepped around the trap with a controlled ease, eyes fixed forward. The others followed her path, their movements slower and quieter than before. The jokes had died, the whispers had faded. Only the sound of their breathing and the distant rhythm of unseen gunfire remained as they pushed deeper into the dark. The deeper they moved into the forest, the more Leah began to notice things the others missed entirely. She paused beside a narrow tree trunk where a bullet had struck at an odd angle. Then another. And another. The impacts lined up in a diagonal pattern across 4 different trees, a formation no untrained fighter would create. Only an expert marksman would understand what those shots meant. Leah traced one of the grooves with her thumb, eyes narrowing as she followed the invisible line through the darkness. A few steps farther, she crouched near a patch of leaves where footprints overlapped in a scattered, almost chaotic way. To most people, it looked like someone had stumbled or panicked. But Leah shook her head. The spacing was intentional. The direction changes too sharp. Someone had scattered their prints deliberately to confuse whoever might be tracking them. She rose and walked a few paces to a low, broken branch that leaned unnaturally. Another branch ahead pointed subtly to the left. These weren't random breaks, these were signals. Quiet breadcrumbs left behind by someone trained to move unseen. She stopped at the root line of an old oak and knelt. Her fingers brushed a shallow indentation in the soil, still warm beneath the cold surface. "They fought back," she whispered. Operators exchanged uncertain looks. How could she know that from a dent in the dirt? Blake stared at her, confused and unsettled. Leah didn't explain. Instead, she rose smoothly and gave 3 short, precise commands. Lights off. Shift left. No talking for the next 50 steps. Her voice wasn't raised. She didn't try to overpower anyone, yet the authority in her tone left no room for argument. The lieutenant nodded immediately, and the others followed his cue. Flashlights clicked off. The team shifted silently left, deeper into the cover of the thicker trees. Blake muttered under his breath, "Who is she really?" No one answered. Even if they wanted to, Leah had already moved ahead. Suspense wrapped itself around the group as the forest began to feel unnervingly alive. Echoes drifted in and out, quiet taps, distant cracks of branches, soft whistles of wind that could have been breath or leaves. Their own footsteps felt too loud in comparison. Every shadow seemed to stretch and move as if watching them. Leah's pace slowed again. Her head lifted slightly, her eyes fixed on something only she could interpret. A faint glint flashed between 2 branches, a reflection too straight, too rigid to be nature. Before anyone else even registered it, Leah raised her hand sharply, signaling cover. The team dropped behind rocks and fallen logs just in time. The lieutenant scanned the area but saw nothing. Leah, however, kept her focus locked on the exact point of the glint, reading angles and potential threats. She didn't shout. She didn't panic. She simply waited until the sound faded and the pressure in the air shifted, then motioned them forward again. Another clue came moments later. As the path narrowed between 2 thick pines, Leah gave a subtle hand gesture, 2 fingers sweeping downward, then tapping her chest. The lieutenant froze. That was an old Ranger hand signal, one rarely used anymore, known only to Special Forces veterans who had trained in remote, high-risk environments. The fact that she used it without hesitation sent a chill through him. The others noticed too. A few stopped looking at her like an outsider. Their steps synced with hers without conscious thought. When she paused, they paused. When she shifted right, so did they. She had become their guide without ever asking to be. The forest grew darker, the silence pressing closer. But now, instead of doubting her every move, the teen followed Leah Monroe as if she could see the entire battlefield laid out in front of her. And in her steady, controlled breathing, in the way she scanned the shadows, they began to sense a truth they could not yet name. The gunfire exploded without warning, ripping through the night in a burst so close it felt like the trees themselves were shooting. The team scattered instantly, diving behind rocks, logs, and thick roots, breaths sharp and frantic. Branches snapped overhead as rounds tore through the canopy. The forest echoed with chaos. Everyone dropped. Everyone except Leah. She moved with a calm so unnatural it froze Blake mid-crawl. Leah stepped forward instead of back, her boots silent over the cold soil. She dropped to one knee, smooth and steady, as if she had done this exact motion thousands of times before. Her rifle came up in a single, fluid sweep. No wasted motion. No tremor. She aimed through a gap between 2 trees so narrow that most shooters wouldn't have bothered. She fired 1 round. Just 1. Silence fell. The gunfire didn't taper. It stopped instantly, as if cut clean with a blade. Even the wind hesitated. Operators turned toward her, breaths steaming in the cold air, eyes wide. That shot had traveled through a gap the width of a fist, threading between branches and hitting something none of them could even see. Mockery vanished. In its place, tension, disbelief, and an uneasiness none of them wanted to admit. Leah didn't wait for praise or questions. She just said, "Move," and pushed forward. She followed a scattered path between trees, reading signs no one else noticed. A snapped twig angled a specific way, a dirt scuff indicating controlled retreat, a faint drag mark hidden beneath leaves. This wasn't random movement. This was a coded trail left by someone elite, someone who expected another sniper to find it. Only an expert would recognize it. The team hesitated but followed her anyway, deeper into the forest until a faint groan drifted from behind a fallen trunk. Leah raised her hand. The group halted instantly. She slipped around the log and found a man slumped against the base of an old pine. Staff Chief Nolan Graves, his uniform torn, arm wrapped in a hasty bandage, blood dried along his temple. Nolan looked up, exhausted but alert. The moment his eyes landed on Leah, they widened with disbelief. "You," he breathed. "They sent you?" Leah nodded once. "Just point the way." That simple exchange sent confusion rippling through the team. How did a wounded SEAL know her? How did he say her presence like it meant hope? While the others stared, Leah moved quickly, kneeling beside Nolan. Her hands were steady as she checked his pulse, adjusted his bandage, and braced his arm with a precision that came from years of battlefield trauma care. Her movements were confident, almost instinctive, as if she had patched up men like him more times than she could count. Nolan leaned slightly toward the lieutenant and whispered, "If she's here, you're in good hands." The lieutenant didn't respond right away. He just watched as Leah secured Nolan's injuries with quiet expertise. For the first time, some of the operators looked at her with something close to respect. Leah finished tying off a strip of cloth and asked, "Where are the others?" Nolan swallowed. "3 groups. We split after the ambush. Held them off as long as we could while pushing toward higher ground. They're still out there but barely holding on." Leah studied the forest like she could see every hidden path. Locations? Nolan didn't hesitate. North cluster near the rock ledge. Middle group in the ravine. Last group pinned near the left ridge, the steep one. Leah didn't open a map. She didn't check GPS. She just nodded, already visualizing the terrain in her mind. She pointed left. "The ridge group is closest." "We take that first." The lieutenant stepped forward. "We don't know how many enemies are between us and—" "We're splitting," Leah said quietly. "You take 3 this way. I'll take left ridge." Her tone wasn't forceful, but it carried a weight the others couldn't ignore. The lieutenant hesitated, torn between protocol and instinct. Splitting meant risk. Letting her go alone meant even more. Nolan exhaled and whispered, "Trust her." Those 2 words settled over the entire team like a command stamped in stone. The lieutenant finally nodded, and the forest around them shifted again. No longer mocking her, no longer doubting her, but watching as if it knew something none of them yet understood. Leah rose to her feet, tightened her grip on her rifle, and headed toward the left ridge without looking back. Leah moved ahead of the group, her steps silent over damp soil as the forest thinned near the ridge. The air felt colder here, sharper, carrying the faint scent of smoke. She raised a hand, signaling the team to slow. A rustle cut through the quiet, followed by a low groan. The operators tensed, weapons lifted, eyes scanning the shadows. A figure stumbled into view, clutching his side. Another SEAL, battered, exhausted, but alive. When his eyes adjusted enough to see Leah clearly, he stopped dead in his tracks. His breath caught and his voice trembled as he whispered, "Ma'am, we thought you were gone." The operators froze. Confusion rippled through them. Why did he call her ma'am? Why say it with that kind of reverence, that disbelief? Before anyone could speak, another sound rose from the ravine below, a strained voice calling for help. The lieutenant signaled 2 men to climb down. Moments later they emerged, supporting another figure between them. Commander Briggs. Dirt streaked his face, his uniform torn from the fall, but his posture stiffened the instant his eyes landed on Leah. He straightened despite the pain, shoulders pulling back with instinctive respect. The tired haze in his eyes cleared, replaced by something sharp and commanding. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to the lieutenant. "You're walking with the ghost of Merrill Pass." Silence hit the group like a shockwave. The forest seemed to stop moving. Radios quieted. Even the wind paused. Several operators swallowed hard, eyes widening as pieces connected. The impossible shot. The trail only she could read. The wounded SEALs who recognized her instantly. The old ranger signal. The calm under fire. The way the commander, a man known for never showing fear or admiration, looked at her as if she carried the weight of legends. Respect filled the space where mockery once lived. Leah didn't comment. She didn't acknowledge the title or the looks. She simply glanced at the ridge above them, gauging distance, listening to echoes only she seemed able to interpret. Then she lifted her hand and gestured them onward, calm and steady, as if the revelation meant nothing to her at all. The team followed without hesitation, their doubts silenced by a truth they were only beginning to understand. The trees thinned as they neared the cliff, and the sound of distant gunfire grew sharper, echoing off the stone walls in frantic bursts. The last group of SEALs was pinned high against a jagged rock face, trapped between enemy fire below and the sheer drop behind them. Their muzzle flashes were weak, sporadic, the desperate kind fired by men running out of time and ammunition. The operators tensed, scanning for an angle of approach, but the terrain was brutal. Too exposed. Too steep, too dangerous. Leah moved past them without a word. She stepped onto a moss-covered boulder that overlooked the entire battlefield. The wind whipped across the ridge, strong enough to sting the eyes and bend small branches. For most snipers, these conditions would make accuracy nearly impossible. But Leah stood with perfect calm, tightening the sling on her old rifle before kneeling with careful precision. Her posture didn't shift, even as the gusts tried to push her off balance. Blake watched her in disbelief. Hours ago, he had called her a liability. Now he could barely comprehend the steadiness in her hands. Leah exhaled slowly, reading the chaos below. The angles, the wind, the echoes, the glimpses of movement between rocks. Then she fired once. The shot rang sharp and clean, cutting through the noise. A figure dropped behind a fallen tree far below. She adjusted her aim by less than an inch and fired again. Another hit. Perfect placement. No hesitation. 2 more shots followed, each one timed with the breath of the wind, each one threading impossible gaps in the terrain. 4 shots. 4 impacts. 4 threats eliminated so quickly that the team barely registered the sequence before it ended. Down on the cliff, the pinned SEALs looked up as the pressure suddenly lifted. They began moving toward safer cover, limping and sliding across the rock face while enemy fire faltered. The path to them opened, narrow but clear, created by Leah's impossible accuracy under the worst conditions. The operators watched in absolute awe, silent in the aftermath. Just hours before, they had joked behind her back, doubting her every move. Now they stood frozen, witnessing something they would remember for the rest of their lives. Blake lowered his weapon slowly, eyes never leaving her. The lieutenant exhaled, as if realizing he'd been holding his breath for minutes. Commander Briggs stepped forward and stood beside Leah as she rose from the boulder. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. "You saved them, again." Leah shook her head gently, brushing a bit of moss from her knee. "They did the hard part," she said. "They held out." The forest seemed to agree, falling into a deep, heavy quiet. No wind, no echoes. No distant shots, just stillness, as if the land itself recognized what had just happened. The rescued SEALs reached the team moments later, breathless and worn but alive. They gathered around Leah without needing to speak. The operators formed a wider circle around them, the same men who had laughed at her earlier now standing with lowered heads, humbled by what they had witnessed. There was no cheering, no loud praise, no slaps on the back or triumphant shouts. Respect didn't need volume. It moved through the group in silence, in the way the men adjusted their posture, in the way they watched her with a kind of quiet disbelief, in the way no one dared interrupt her steady breathing. Leah stood at the center of the moment, not proud, not seeking recognition, simply ensuring the rescued SEALs were stable and accounted for. The wind picked up again, softer this time, as if the forest had decided it was safe to breathe. The team followed her lead, falling into step behind her, not because they were ordered to, but because every one of them now understood who she was and what she had silently carried long before this night. No one said a word. They didn't need to. Back at the base, the wind had calmed and the night felt different, lighter somehow, as if the forest had finally released its hold on everyone's nerves. The operators who had once whispered about Leah now approached her slowly, almost awkwardly, their eyes lowered in something close to shame. One by one they offered quiet words of gratitude, apologies folded into nervous breaths. Blake Ronan, who had mocked her the loudest, stood before her with his helmet under his arm, struggling for the right words. Leah spared him the search. She simply nodded and thanked him for his part in bringing everyone home. She didn't accept their respect with pride or superiority. Instead, she directed the credit back to the team, reminding them that rescues were never about one person. "We all move together," she said, her voice steady. "No one gets through nights like this alone." The rescued SEALs gathered around her soon after, forming a natural circle the way family does around someone they trust completely. Commander Briggs kept a hand on her shoulder for a moment, then stepped aside so the others could speak with her. Each man seemed to relax just by standing near her, as if the fear of the night's ambush finally faded in her presence. When the lieutenant approached, he looked torn between gratitude and regret. Before he could speak, Leah met his eyes and said gently, "Don't punish anyone for doubting me. People judge what they don't understand." Her tone wasn't bitter, it was understanding. The lieutenant nodded slowly, accepting her request with a quiet respect that hadn't been there before. Around them, the operators shifted, realizing she had just protected them even after the way they had treated her. It left them even more humbled. As the camp settled and the first hints of dawn brushed the sky, a soft reflection settled over the moment. Courage, the narrator would say, isn't loud. Strength isn't always visible. And sometimes, the quietest person in the room carries the heaviest past, one shaped by battles fought far from recognition, far from applause, far from those who might ever know the truth. Some heroes never ask for recognition. Their actions speak for them. Tonight's story was a reminder of how courage often lives in silence, in the steady hands and calm hearts of those who never demand attention. Leah Monroe showed that true strength doesn't need to announce itself. It simply rises when others are in danger and stands firm when doubt surrounds it. Her quiet resolve carried an entire team home, and her humility afterward showed the depth of her character just as clearly as her actions on the ridge. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These stories keep the courage alive for generations to come.